How long does it really take a gentle parented child to learn how to independently emotionally regulate so that they're not tantruming all the time? My name's Jodie Thornton, and I want to talk about what we can and can't predict about gentle parented children and how they become independently capable of managing their emotions. So the very first thing is that what I mostly see in the gentle parenting space is people basically just saying you just keep holding space for your child. Like, just keep staying calm, keep getting down on their level, keep focusing on your own regulation, and then like your child will eventually just not need so much emotional support anymore. And there's a couple of things that can happen. One is that if your child is going through a phase where where they're going through a phase where they have a less emotional capacity. So that can be in a developmental stage. It can be through going through a period of change. It can be through a bunch of different things. But if they're going through a stage where they just have less emotional capacity, then yes, that can pass. However, what doesn't pass is that the reason they're getting overwhelmed and tantruming is because they don't know what to do with the feelings and they don't have enough emotional capacity to not get overwhelmed. Now, if the tantrum phase just passes because the period of change stops or they've finished that developmental stage, they haven't actually learned what to do with their feelings. They just now have enough capacity to withstand them for longer so then they don't get overwhelmed, so then they don't tantrum. And so if we're looking at gentle parenting from a perspective of teaching our children how to independently manage their emotions, well then we're not going to judge it based on how many tantrums they're having, right? We're going to judge it based on how aware of their own emotions are they. How well can they articulate what their emotions are telling them about what they need? How well can they problem solve to find a creative solution to get their needs met without, like, that in a way that works for everybody that's involved? And how well are they able to take into account somebody else's perspective? So a sibling, their other parent, another adult in their life. Like, how well are they able to navigate? I like to understand what's important to you. Here's what's important to me. And that all sounds like it's, like, as I say that, it sounds like something that an older child would do, but actually children are really capable of this really, really young, right? So we want to just always keep in mind that just because we're working on something that has long-term payoffs doesn't mean that we're waiting until they're 18 years old before we see the payoff of gentle parenting. We want to be seeing their skills develop now. And I think that's the biggest message I want to put through in this video, is that the way you hear gentle parenting discussed in like the culture as it is now, and this is both in like parenting spaces, like peer support spaces, but then also from the experts, what we hear is that it's actually quite passive. Like, if you look at what they're telling you to do, is like, don't make it worse. So don't bring your feelings into it. Don't hold them to expectations that are not appropriate to their developmental stage. And don't dismiss them, which is a really important thing that has shifted, I think, in the bulk of the parenting spaces. Is like, don't dismiss your child's needs. Just because they're not an adult doesn't mean that their needs aren't important and valid, right? What's missing from all of that is, where is the skills development? Where is the development of recognizing that my feelings are coming up, recognizing my feelings are getting overwhelming, recognizing what I really need that's underneath the surface level issue, and problem solving? Like, these are all, like, I don't know that tangible is the right word, but it's like measurable, at least, skills that we can look at. Does my child have the ability to do these things? And again, these are not things that I say, teach them when they're 13. I'm saying teach them from the beginning, right? And we don't expect a child to be able to do any of these things independently. But what we want to be doing with our gentle parenting is not just waiting for the skill to develop. And the reason I feel really strongly about not waiting for the skill to develop is because, when we talk about modeling, right? the way we talk about modeling is it's as if you are the perfect model of how to do something, your child will automatically take that on. And we all know that our kids can like pick up something from a friend or pick up something from an adult in the extended family. Like they can pick up things and just latch onto them and it becomes a thing unless you know how to unpack it, right? The modeling that our children experience, possibly in your own home, but definitely in daycares and in schools, in workplaces, and the rest of the culture, the modeling that they are exposed to, and especially in pop culture, right? The modeling that they are exposed to is at best not healthy, at worst quite toxic. Right? Most of the modeling we see is about self-sacrifice, is about people-pleasing, is about recognizing if you're the person in power. So if you have the power, you should use it over other people. And if you're the person who doesn't have the power, you should acquiesce and just fit into the system, right? We don't want our children to be subject to this modeling. Now, I secondarily say modeling is not the best skill to use when we're talking about emotional awareness and emotional strategies, but that's a whole nother conversation. But mostly I want to say let's not rely on modeling because the culture that we are a part of is not healthy. It is not, let's everybody bring their needs up and let's figure out a way to work for everybody, right? That's not what we have a situation of. So we don't want to leave our children to just grow the skills of their own accord. We want to be active, I was going to say participants, but it's almost not active participants, it's active leaders. We want to be active leaders and mentors in our child's emotional and communication development. And so what that means is we don't just stay calm and not make the situation worse and just wait. That's not the most effective way to help your child grow and develop emotionally and in their social skills. This is way better than if we look at what most of us are raised with. So if that's where you're at, it's totally okay. But what we want to do is take the next step. We want to be actively teaching our children each of those skills. And if you are actively teaching your children each of those skills, so how to regulate, how to notice their emotions, how to communicate about their emotions, how to solve the underlying problem, and how to work as a team player with everyone else that's involved. And I kind of would add like as an overlaying almost like a value statement is like how to be able to be considerate without people pleasing, how to be assertive without bossy is not the right word, but you know what I mean, that sense that you're you want things your way, right? Strong-willed in the negative connotation way, I guess. Inflexible or stubborn might be a better way of wording that, right? We want to make sure that our children are developing these skills. Now, if you're doing this actively from a skills-based perspective, here's what you can expect in terms of timeline. What I routinely see with parents that I'm working with, specifically where their child is tantruming a lot, we find that within 4 weeks, we substantially reduce the intensity and number of tantrums. So for some children, and so this depends on the situation they're in, personality type, age, you know, how much change is happening, all these things, right? Depending on all of those things as to whether we go from tantruming to not tantruming, or we go from tantruming to less intense, less duration, less often, is a thing I can't predict for you, but we will see within 4 weeks a substantial reduction in the number of tantrums, the frequency of tantrum, and the duration of tantrums. That happens within 4 weeks. After those first 4 weeks, and let's talk about what happens, right? The reason we see a substantial reduction in those first 4 weeks is because we're getting to the root cause of what's going on in those tantrums. So we're getting to why are they upset in the first place? And we're getting to like what is a solution that will work in the situation that you're in. Now, for some children, even though the tantrums might be about different topics, it's one underlying cause. And for other children, it's multiple underlying causes, which even if that's the case, the more underlying causes we find and address, the less often your child is already like spent emotionally. So therefore, the more capacity they have then for the next overwhelming thing to be marginally less overwhelming, so that they can handle it and talk it through in a greater way. So that's what we see in the first 4 weeks. Then after the first 4 weeks, what we're working on in those times of skill development is about their emotional awareness. So what we want to see, one of the first things we want to see is we want to see your child recognize their feelings and notice and like talk about them without needing to be overwhelmed. Like actually say, I need this. This is upsetting to me. And they may or may not, again, depending on personality, depending on their pre-existing emotional awareness, depending on a whole bunch of things, they may be able to say to you, this is the reason I'm upset. But at the very least, they'll be able to say, the Lego is the problem, right? At the very least, they'll be able to give you what is the stimulus of the problem, and then that allows you to help them unpack what is underneath that. So we're looking for that emotional awareness. So, and in this case, what we're doing is preventing more tantrums because we're not waiting until they're upset, right? We're getting in when the emotion is a whisper or maybe it's a conversation rather than waiting until it's a big problem and it's overwhelming before we get in and talk about it, right? This is one of the skills we want to be developing. The next skill we want to be developing is for your child to be able to articulate what's underneath the issue. That in that piece, we get a lot of advantage for your child, not just having you as the safe space, but actually being able to advocate for themselves with everybody else. So their siblings, their other parent, their educators, their friends, all these other people. All of a sudden, instead of your child being the child that, and like for a child that tensions at home, sometimes they tantrum outwardly, but in other cases, they may not tantrum, they may withdraw, or they may be acquiescing, right? What we want to see is that your child doesn't just have you as their safe space. We want them to be able to advocate for themselves in a healthy way with everybody else. And so the more you can teach your child to be able to articulate what the real issue is, the easier it is for them to speak up if they're a person who usually would internalize when they don't feel comfortable. And also, the easier it is for them to talk to other children who are also not yet emotionally mature, but also other adults who are not as gentle in their approach as you are. An adult who isn't quite bought into gentle parenting will often still do quite well with a child who can explain why they are upset, rather than a child that just appears to be overreacting, or a child that, and like we know that that's not the case, but they are not necessarily going to see that. And so the more your child can articulate why they are upset, the easier it is for the adults that are not on the same page, that we wish we could get them on the same page, but we can't. So yes, so that's a really important skill. And then over time, so we're looking at this like awareness of their emotions and then their articulation of the underlying issue. The next thing we want to be able to do is help them to get really flexible and creative at finding solutions that work. And so when they're really upset that they can't have the t-shirt that they want to wear to daycare, by understanding what is the root cause of why that t-shirt is so important, then we can find another solution, which may be a different shirt, but it also may be something completely unrelated, right? The more your child has practice at problem solving, the easier they'll be able to come up with solutions with everybody. Again, not just with you as their safe space, but with everybody around them. And kids are so creative. Like, they're so much more neuroplastic than we are. So they're much more creative just generally. But also they're so motivated and they have so much more time. So once we give them the the basics around figuring out how to solve problems, they're so good at it. They astound me at the solutions that they come up with. It's amazing. The next skill we want to be looking at is their ability to be considerate of other people. And people will tell you that children can't have empathy until they're much older. I'm not a development expert, and so I can't say for sure. But what I see in very young children is what appears to be empathy. Maybe it's just consideration, I don't know. But I think that it's very, and maybe it's just behavioral, right? But I think that we don't have to worry about defining, is this empathy or is it consideration or is it a behavioral, like we know that everybody else needs to be taken into account intellectually. Regardless of what that is, if we know that we're solving the problem and that your child isn't acquiescing just to keep the peace, your child's actually looking for a solution that works for them and everybody else, I kind of feel like, well, the empathy will come, right? Like, if part of the process is getting someone to share with you what's important to them, the empathy will come as it comes, right? So that's our next skill. And then the skill that kind of supports all of this is the emotional regulation. And so when we think about emotional regulation, what most people think it is like something stressful, so just take some deep breaths and calm down. Now, that doesn't work for you as an adult. I mean, some people say it does, but for most of us, if someone's in a really stressful situation and someone says, now take some deep breaths, I mean, obviously they wouldn't be so condescending or sarcastic about it, but you know what I mean. Like, the idea that if you're in a stressful situation, you just need somebody to remind you to take deep breaths, not useful. But also, what we think we're doing with that is bringing the level of intensity down so that we can be logical. What's actually happening is we are putting our feelings aside and using our rational brain. But we actually need to bring our feelings down to a level that we can hear them and use our rational brain to problem solve. We don't want to put our feelings aside because our feelings tell us what's important to us about the situation, right? That's the key to not acquiescing. That's the key to not being inconsiderate in problem solving, is when we accept that everybody in the situation needs to bring their feelings and their problem solving skills together. So what we want for our children is first to know how to regulate, so to take those really loud feelings and bring them, it's almost like tuning in a radio station. Gosh, I'm going to have to come up with a better example than that for the younger parents among us, because they would not remember tuning in a radio station. But anyways, so it's almost like tuning in a radio station so that you can clearly hear the lyrics, right? This is what we're doing with bringing the volume down. We're not turning it off, but we're bringing it to a level where you can really hear it. And first, we want your child to be capable of you holding space and then being able to regulate reasonably quickly. But second, we want your child to be able to do that if you're not available. And like I would say, the way I've phrased that is not ideal. We want your child to be able to do it if you're not available. We also want your child to be able to do it if you're just like, I don't know, having a cup of tea. You know, like, we don't want your child's default to be needing you. We want to support them as often as they need it in the learning process. But the end result is not that your child can come to you when they're upset. The end result is that your child predominantly manages their own emotions. They come to you when they're stuck, right? We want that for the rest of their lives, right? We want them, you know, not just when they're teenagers and not just when they're young adults, but for the rest of their lives, we want them to come to us when they're stuck and they need help. Part of this is having all of these skills together will really help to create that depth of connection, and also make sure that you are actually a person who can help them, because a lot of people want to be the person that their child comes to, but when their child comes to them, they either inadvertently get their feelings invalidated or told what they should do, or that the parent has a better understanding. Really, what we want to be able to do is help our children stay connected to their own values, keep their own autonomy, but make a decision that works for them. That's what we want our role to be in the long term. So, when a parent comes to me and says, I want to work on tantrums, what we expect to see is in the first 4 weeks, we see fewer tantrums, they're less intense, and they don't last as long. And then over the next 5 months, we get to a place where your child is able to talk to you when their feelings are small, not waiting until they're overwhelmed. We get to a place where day to day your child is listening well, your child is advocating for themselves, your child is able to really be considerate and flexible in how they find solutions to their underlying needs. And we really get to a place where life is easier. And so that all up happens within 6 months. And so I just want to say that I would like parents to recognize that we don't have to stay in this like never ending loop of your child gets upset, you have to stay calm as best you can, and sometimes you lose your cool and then you repair, but like they get upset, you hold space, they get upset, you hold space, they get upset, you hold space, and we just wait for it to stop of its own. That's not where we want to be. Where we want to be is when the time is right for us in our own situations to have the space to learn the skills. We want to actually see within 6 months, we want to see that your child has emotional awareness, that your child has emotional regulation, that the two of you are very good at being a team to find solutions, and that your child is starting to become independent at managing their emotions. Now, at the end of that 6 months, we can't necessarily predict that where your child will be in terms of the independence. But where I see you being at the end of that 6 months is in a place where like it doesn't upset you that they're still learning, that you feel confident that what you're doing is supporting their development, and that because you've worked through their emotions between you and them, when they're talking about their emotions being upset when they're not with you, you can coach them through the process, right? So we want to get to a place where by the end of the 6 months, like you are setting the scene for them to develop in line with their own personality and your circumstances, that you are holding the space in a way that they are developing the skills as quickly as makes sense for them as an individual, because we really can't predict how quickly the children will shift and change. Lots of things can impact that, but we know that they're capable of developing the skills, and we want to see for all the time that you are actively working on building their skills, we want to see consistent, like obvious ways that your child's skill set is building up. Right? This is not a case where you just keep saying it and one day they kind of learn it by rote. That's not what emotional skill sets are. Right? That's learning how to say the right thing, and your child may learn to, like, on the outside behave in the way that they're expected to, but to have the internal skill set, we're not just waiting. Basically what we're doing is we're looking at where is your child at, where are they stuck in learning these skills. We give them some support to continue building the skills, and then we see what changes. And if nothing changes, we try a different way. If something changes, we move on to the next step, right? And we're learning from what works for your child and what doesn't work for your child. That's where we're getting the progress, right? And so ultimately what I want to say is, it's not a case of staying calm and getting down on their level and holding space endlessly, and then one day your child will be able to do it. Maybe the tantrums will stop because eventually they'll go. I mean, some adults still tantrum, we all know that, but maybe they'll pass the age where they don't tantrum anymore. That doesn't mean that they've learned the underlying emotional skills that we want, and that's where we want to be focusing on. When they have the underlying emotional skills, you'll see them be happier, you will see them being overwhelmed less often, you'll also see them start to really develop a strong sense of who they are. So really, a strong-willed child will be able to recognize in themselves that they're not a problem. Like the world might see a strong-willed child as problematic, that they're too much or they're too loud or they're too stubborn or all of these things. That a strong-willed child will really start to see that they are a constructive and like really valuable person. And then for the children who are, maybe at home are expressing themselves, but out in the world are, internalizing and being angels for everybody else, but keeping it all for home. We see those children start to advocate for themselves. We see them start to be assertive. We see them start to build deeper friendships because they can show more of themselves. They're not holding things in so much. And this is where the juice is, right? It's because, I think this is part of the reason why gentle parents end up in this loop of I just have to keep going, is because it's almost this thing of we are told that it's behavioral, right? Old school parenting would say that it's at a behavioral level that we're concerned about. And gentle parents, we know that it's not at the behavioral level that's the issue. It's how they're developing on the inside. And so then if we're not going to measure based on whether they're having tantrums, of course they're going to get overwhelmed when they're upset. Where that leads us to is that we're not measuring anything, right? Because we're not holding them to behavioral standards that are not appropriate for children. We're also not looking at how's their skill development going, looking at how much space they would have to be building a sense of who they are and having deeper friendships and having more friendships, maybe all of these things, having an easier relationship with both parents, all of these things. The space is taken up by either the emotions that spill out or the emotions that are repressed, right? The space is all taken up by those things. If we free up that space, we free up the space for our children to really grow and thrive. And we don't, I want to say this 1,000 times, we don't just wait for that, right? We actively build the skills in our kids. So I hope this has been really helpful. If you would like my help to actively build these skills in your child and to actively be able to look at what is and isn't working for your child in developing these skills, come and join me in my online group course called Confident Connected Parenting. In this course, I've got video modules that take you through step by step each of the processes to help your child build these skills. And then you've also got 2 live calls a month where we can talk through anywhere that you're stuck. So you've tried this and it's not working, or you've tried this and you got an unexpected result. Your child didn't react the way you expected them to. You're not really sure what the underlying issue is here. You've tried talking to them about it this way and it just doesn't seem to be getting there. Or one of the most common ways that I help parents, they know what the underlying issue is, but they don't see a way to solve that isn't about the entire family prioritizing just one person's needs, right? My experience in doing this for so many years means that I can help you to figure out what's the solution that's realistic in your circumstances, right? We can get there much faster. We cut through the trial and error in getting my support through that process. So if you'd like to join Confident Connected Parenting, the link to join is jodiethornton.com/confident connected parenting. And I would love to have you come along. Once you've bought the course, you have access to it for as long as it exists. I expect to run it for the rest of my life, but of course, there's no guarantees that will happen, but you have access for as long as the course exists. And if I ever decide to wind it up, I'll give you 12 months notice, so you've got enough time to really embed the work before I wrap it up. But I really don't expect that to happen, but just to be clear on expectations. But yeah, so, and because you've got it ongoing, that means that if life happens and you don't end up getting through everything, you can still come back. We could just come back, and when life calms down a little bit, we come back and we get back on the horse and on we go. You've also got it for if you get everything sorted when your child is a toddler and then they hit school age and there's a whole new set of problems. We can come back and apply the same process to get through and look at okay, now that it's more friendship based, what would that look like? How do I coach my child to build those social skills as well? So I would love to have you come along and join the course and really support you to see those skills build and not just be waiting for them to not just waiting for the tantrums to stop. We're actively seeing progress along the way. Thank you so much for watching.